With the Vickers Mark 7 last patch, and the Rooikat Mark 1D this patch, is the meme of the British tech tree being uncompetitive still true? Or has the addition of a few speedy boys brought Britain back into the meta? Alright lads, today I'm going to be talking about the history, performance, weapons and tactics of the Rooikat Mark 1D. Once again we'll begin with the basics. The Rooikat is a rank 6 battle rating 8.3 light tank located in the British tech tree. This vehicle is not a premium, and anyone can grind out this vehicle for free. The Rooikat is located after the Swingfighter and Striker in the tech tree, but is not part of the research line, meaning it can be researched as soon as you unlock rank 6. To unlock the Rooikat, you will first need to grind out 220,000 RP, and then purchase the vehicle for 580,000 silver lions. After this, you have the additional tree crane price of 170,000 silver lions, for a combined price of 750,000 SL. As this vehicle is not a premium, you only get a 440% RP modifier, as well as a 210% silver lion modifier. These modifiers do certainly leave a lot to be desired, and I personally bought a talisman for this tank, which increases your RP modifier to 660%. If you'd like to know more about this tank, and whether it's worth grinding out the 250,000 of RP needed, then stick around for the rest of the video. From the 1960s to the mid-1980s, the standard armed reconnaissance vehicle of the South African Armed Forces was the Elan 90. This was a four-wheeled vehicle, and basically a clone of the French AML 90 which we have in game. The Elan was used extensively in Operation Savannah, a 1975 South African incursion into Angola. Here, the Elan's shortcomings became apparent, mainly the inability to carry soldiers. To somewhat deal with these shortcomings, South Africa introduced the Rattle 90, basically taking the same gun as the Eland, and placing it into a larger six-wheeled chassis. The Rattle and Elan served side by side for several years. However, years later, in 1984, South Africa launched another incursion into Angola, and given the codename Operation Askari. By 1984, however, under the Soviet doctrine of exporting arms to its allies, the Angolan armed forces were now armed with the T-54 and T-55 tanks. These Soviet tanks greatly outclassed both the Eland and the Rattle. The T-54 and T-55 could outrange them, could fire on the move, and had far more armour. You have to remember that the Eland and the Rattle were essentially armoured cars going up against main battle tanks. Both vehicles were used as improvised tank destroyers, but their performance was deemed unacceptable, and this led to the Eland being completely removed from service. After Operation Askari, the South African Armoured Corps had issued a requirement for a heavy armoured car. This resulted in the New Generation Armoured Car Project, which carried out research from 1976 to 1979, and resulted in 3 prototypes tested and built. But the South African Armoured Corps concluded that none of the 3 prototypes was suitable. Several years later, in 1982, 3 more prototypes were built: the Bismarck, the Cheetah Mark 1 and the Cheetah Mark 2. The Bismarck was an 8-wheeled vehicle with the 105mm L7 tank gun. The Cheetah Mark 1 was a 6-wheeled vehicle with the lightweight 76mm gun found on the automatic in-game. The Cheetah Mark 2 was essentially a clone of the Cheetah Mark 1, but had 8 wheels instead of 6. The extra weight of the Mark 2 gave it significantly less combat range than the Mark 1, but gave it much more speed and power due to the extra room available. All 3 of these prototypes were tested, and the Cheetah Mark 2 was liked and adopted by the South African Armoured Corps. When the Cheetah Mark 2 entered South African service, it was designated the Rooikat. This is the Afrikaans translation for a caracal. The first Rooikats were manufactured in late 1987, and production was quite slow, as it took 2 years, until 1989, for the South African Armoured Corps to have a single squadron armed fully with Rooikats. However, mass production did pick up in the mid-1990s. The Rooikat never saw any real combat usage against enemy armour, and instead it was mainly used as a supporting weapon in minor conflicts. The Rooikat is powered by a 10-cylinder water-cooled diesel engine, producing 567 horsepower. This is a massive amount of power for a vehicle of this size, as the Rooikat only weighs 26.5 tons. This 10-cylinder engine, mounted on the Rooikat chassis, gives it a power-to-weight ratio of 21.4 horsepower per ton. All of this power gives you a top speed of 120 km per hour going forwards, and even 44 km per hour in reverse. Yes, this tank can reverse faster than most British main battle tanks can go forward. It is however worth noting that this top speed is only really ever achieved on paved surfaces, and due to most maps being dirt, sand or snow, you will hardly ever reach this top speed. From my tests, I've found that on dirt you can get up to 50 km per hour, whereas your top speed in sand drops down to 40 km per hour, and the biggest killer of this vehicle, snow, your top speed is a measly 20 km per hour. The fact this vehicle has such a difference of speeds depending on the surface is due to it being a wheeled vehicle. This has several positives and negatives. Firstly, wheeled vehicles have a much smaller surface area in contact with the ground when compared to a tracked vehicle. This is a downside, as the entire weight of the vehicle is held by the wheels, whereas a tank spreads its weight across the entire length of its tracks. This essentially means wheeled vehicles perform much worse on soft terrain. Wheeled vehicles, however, do retain their speed much better in turns than their tracked counterparts, which make them much better for large-scale manoeuvring, but a tracked vehicle is obviously better for tight turning. The Rooikat has no ability to neutral steer or turn on the spot, and due to the fact it is an 8-wheel chassis, its turning circle is incredibly large. This makes it very hard to move quickly through tight urban areas, a place where light tanks usually excel. It also makes retreating quite difficult if you're in a tight position, as you will usually have to Austin Powers the Rooikat out of a small gap to escape. The fact the Rooikat is a large 8x8 wheeled vehicle means that it does struggle a bit to be inconspicuous. It's very hard to hide in and be sneaky. You can easily flank players, but it's hard to knife fight due to its poor turning circle. Overall, I'd say that the Rooikat is mobile, but not manoeuvrable. They say that no armour is best armour. Well, we better hope that they're right, as the Rooikat has practically no protection at all. Starting as always with the lower frontal plate, the centre part of the chassis is protected with 30mm of armour. It is slightly angled, giving it an effective thickness of 34mm. This is basically useless. Going out to the sides of the lower frontal plate, you can see the armour drops down to 10mm. The situation is slightly better with the upper frontal plate, but still very poor. The centre has a thickness of 25mm, sloped at 77 degrees, giving it 86mm of effective thickness. Just like the lower frontal plate, the armour drops down at the sides, down to the same 10mm. The upper hull side, again, has very bad armour, with only 20mm of effective thickness, and with the lower hull side being slightly thicker with 25mm. Like the hull side, the hull rear is a measly 20mm thick and completely unsloped, and the protection is no better in the turret at all, with the gun mantlet only being 30mm thick, and the main turret face only being 25mm thick. The outer turret face is pretty angled, giving you an effective thickness of 55mm. You do also have a commander's cupola with only 25mm of armour. However, this isn't much of a weak spot, considering the entire vehicle can be penetrated by reserve tier tanks. The sides of the turret are 25mm thick, and the rear of the turret is only 15mm thick. Overall, the armour of this vehicle is incredibly weak, and you are supposed to use your speed to avoid enemy rounds. While this is possible, the Rooikat is an incredibly large vehicle. It is taller and around the same length as most main battle tanks. This vehicle is not like the Orbals or the R3s, which can rely on their small size to evade enemies. You are a very large target with no armour and fighting against modern APF-SDS rounds. The Rooikat is armed with the 76mm GT4 cannon. This is essentially the same gun as found on the Automatic in the Italian tech tree. It has the usual 10 degrees of gun depression and 20 degrees of gun elevation. The gun is also housed in a turret with a traverse rate of 34 degrees per second, which is incredibly useful for reacting to targets on your flanks. The gun is also fully stabilised, allowing you to perform snapshots and fire on the move, something that the Rooikat will have to do often in order to survive. You do not get access to thermal optics, which in my opinion is a downside, and limits your ability to fight in up tiers, as nearly most 9.3 and above tanks have thermal imaging. You do however get access to night vision, which means you aren't completely useless in a night match. You have a base reload rate of 8.7 seconds, but with crew training, that can be brought down to 6.7 seconds. This is a rather poor reload rate for a gun that is only 76mm in diameter. The 6.7 second reload rate is the same as most of the 105mm guns found on tanks at a similar battle rating. You only have access to 2 different rounds in the Rooikat. The stock round is an armour-piercing, fin-stabilised disregarding sabot round. It has a muzzle velocity of 1,615 meters per second, and 311 meters of penetration at 10 meters. And even out to 1,000 meters, it retains a healthy 291mm of penetration. Not only is this round completely free, as it is your stock shell, but it is incredibly fast and hard hitting, making it very user friendly. The second round you get access to is a high explosive round. It has 969 grams of TNT equivalent, and a penetration of 14mm. This round could be used against very light tanks such as the Orbal HVG, but an APF-SDS round is just as good against light targets, as they will usually be hull broken. I tend not to take any high explosive rounds, as I find them redundant at such a high battle rating. The great APF-SDS round is complemented by the outstanding optical sights you have on the Rooikat. You have a variable optic with both 8 and 12 times zooms, allowing you to easily track targets at long range. You also get a standard 7.62mm machine gun in the turret, which can be used to spot enemies through smoke, but not much else. There are no open turreted tanks at battle rating 8.3 and above, and as this gun is only a rifle caliber round, it isn't powerful enough to penetrate lightly armoured vehicles. Overall, the main cannon on the Rooikat is very powerful, and it can kill everything it will ever meet, and even when I up tier it to 9.7 for use in my top tier British lineup, it is still capable of killing near enough everything. The first thing you should do when you enter a game is to look what the predominant ground surface of the map is. If it is snow or sand, then the Rooikat may be severely held back due to the fact it is a wheeled vehicle. On maps with sand or snow, I believe the British Warrior is a much better choice than the Rooikat, as it allows you to navigate the terrain much faster and has a comparable amount of firepower. One tactic frequently used by light tanks is to rush cap circles at the beginning of a game. This helps get your team into a winning position and also gives you spawn points. If you get a snow map and take out the Rooikat, then all of the tracked vehicles will beat you to the cap circle, pretty much negating your primary advantage, your speed. On snow and sand maps, take the Warrior. On maps with hard roads and dirt, take the Rooikat. Let's say we get a good map for the Rooikat. I will spawn into a game with around 25 APF SDS rounds and will choose one of 3 tactics. The first tactic is the previously mentioned rushing of cap circles. You'll have to be careful here, as it is very common for enemies to drop artillery on cap circles at the beginning of a game, and with your non-existent armour, you are incredibly vulnerable to being one-shot by enemy arty. There are also several enemy vehicles such as the Orbital and BMPs, which can get to cap circles relatively quickly, so expect to have to defend yourself from equally powerful vehicles whilst capping. Remember that you will be roughly around 30 seconds ahead of your friendly tanks, so don't expect any support if you overextend. The second tactic is rushing to a position that effectively denies enemies access to key positions across the map. Earlier on in the video, I said that this tank is mobile but not manoeuvrable. You do not want to play this vehicle as a circle strafing light tank, trying to run rings about bigger, heavier main battle tanks, as your turning circle just doesn't allow it. Instead, doing my second tactic, and using your speed to get yourself into a powerful position, you will get much better results. The last tactic is essentially the same as tactic 2, except you use your speed to flank the enemy. This is a highly situational, as some maps like Port Novorovsk are basically just one big choke point, and don't allow flanking. But maps like Normandy and Poland, which have large open areas away from the caps, are very suitable to exploit the speed of the Rooikat. You are very vulnerable to both planes and helicopters, as your non-existent armour means even small bombs are deadly, and the current cancer spam of German G91s have been responsible for most of my deaths. In terms of lineups, the 8.3 British lineup is alright but not great. You have the Warrior, Chieftain Mark III, Striker and Chieftain Marksman as your self-propelled anti-aircraft gun. One of the problems with the 8.3 lineup is that it is always up tier to at least 8.7, and more often than not up tier to 9.3 to fight with the XM1s. Here, the Rooikat and the Warrior perform well, but the Chieftain Mark III is rather awful at tanking an up tier. You also have the premium shot cal delay, which isn't bad, but is incredibly slow, which is completely out of the meta. I personally like the Rooikat as it is a great addition to the late tier British tanks, and I use it frequently in 9.7 British lineups. And when I finish grinding my Challenger 2, it will be used at 10.3 as well. The great top speed and acceleration, as well as a punchy fully stabilised gun, are just as effective at 10.3 as they are at 8.3. The Rooikat, Warrior and recently added Vickers Mark 7, as well as the late tier British main battle tanks, give the Brits a formidable late tier lineup. Overall, the Rooikat is best played as a light support and flanking vehicle, supporting your bigger main battle tanks, and avoiding being the primary target. As you are a light tank, you get the ability to spot enemy players and repair your teammates, and you should take advantage of this. If there is an enemy too heavily armoured for you to deal with, spot them and let a friendly take them out. And if you can get yourself into a strong position, your lack of armour means nothing, and your amazing gun can make short work of nearly any vehicle in the game. To conclude, I believe the Rooikat is well worth grinding out. It adds a whole new level of flexibility to the British lineup. Whilst the Warrior does occupy a similar role and playstyle, the speed and great tank killing gun of the Rooikat really does distinguish it from anything else the British currently have. It does need to be deployed sensibly, both in terms of survivability and performance. On maps with snow and sand, as I said, the Warrior is far better at getting to caps and strong points. But on paved and dirt maps, the Rooikat easily outcompetes the Warrior. This is nothing but a good thing, as you now have two very powerful vehicles which can be used in different situations. And as both vehicles are non-premium, there's nothing stopping you getting both. I would however recommend grinding out the Warrior first, as it has thermal imaging, anti-tank guided missiles, and a pretty good autocannon, and is overall just more useful in a lineup in my opinion. I have used the Rooikat extensively at battle rating 8.3 and 9.7, and can say that the late tier British lineups are far more enjoyable now we have a good light tank. Without a doubt, get this vehicle. As always, I hope you found this video useful lads, and thank you very much for watching.